This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast that looked up the Wikipedia entry for Pasta Primavera this weekend. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Let's talk about some college equestrian. Now, we're going to talk about Pasta Primavera later in the show. Right now, we're going to take a look at some meet recaps. First meet of the week that we have to look at, Texas A&M at TCU. I thought that the Horned Frogs were going to win this one by about 2 points. Here's how the meet went. Fences started things off. TCU won that one 3-2. Raining was going on as well. A&M won that one 3-2. So this was a tie at the half. That's usually a good sign for the road teams, except those were probably Texas A&M's best events, and they really would have liked to have been up by 2 or 3 going into the second half. Over we go to the second half. On flat, TCU wins that one 3-2, and horsemanship, TCU wins that one 3-2 as well. So that made the final 11-9 TCU. This was a big home win for the Frogs. They got a win over one of the best 4 teams in the country, and like I keep telling you every week, you could put Auburn, SMU, TCU, Texas A&M in any order you want because each of them would probably beat all of those other 3 at home. And that's why Texas A&M really shouldn't be upset with this result either. They stayed close, and there was a chance they could have swung the upset, but this loss is not that bad for them, all things considered. Next meet to take a look at, Lynchburg at Sweetbriar. Now, I thought that Sweetbriar was going to win this one by about 3 or 4 points. Let's see what really happened. Fences started things off. Lynchburg won that one 3-2. Over we go to the flat, and then Sweetbriar wins that one 3-2. That makes our final score 5-5. So then they go back, they do the tiebreaker where they total up all the raw judges' scores, and Sweetbriar took the win 849-842. So very close. But still, this is a big win for Sweetbriar. They had to come from behind to do it, but they defended their home turf against the 2-time defending national champs. For Lynchburg, this was a really close loss for them. This was almost their signature win of the season. I would not have thought any team could have gone into Sweetbriar and gotten a win, and they almost did it. So that should give them a lot of confidence heading into the postseason. South Carolina at UC Davis. Now, I thought this one would be tough, but I thought the Gamecocks would win by about 1 point. In fences, that went 4-1 for South Carolina. Flat went 2-1 for South Carolina. Horsemanship went 3-2 for UC Davis. And reining went 3-2 for South Carolina. That made the final score 11-7 South Carolina. So this was a very nice start to the weekend for the Gamecocks. Road meets are really tough, but they were able to stay ahead of the Aggies pretty much the whole day. For UC Davis, they had a shot at that upset, but they just couldn't quite get it done. Now they're going to turn their attention to the ECAC tournament. Next meet to take a look at, Oklahoma State at SMU. I thought that SMU was going to win this one by about 6 points. Let's see what happened. Fences went 4-1 for SMU. Flat went 4-1 for SMU. Horsemanship went 3-1 for SMU. And reining went 3-0 for SMU's. That made the final score a whopping 14-5 SMU. Now, this win left no doubt that SMU is just a terror at home. The Mustangs won every event, and the closest was a 2-point margin of victory. Very impressive win. For Oklahoma State, they would have liked to have ridden a little bit better, but this was a road meet against what I consider to be the second best team in the country, and I doubt that there is any team in the nation that could beat SMU at home. All right, now let's look at a big one to a lot of my listeners, Georgia at Auburn. Now, when I looked at the stats going into this one, I thought Auburn would win this one by about 4 or 5 points. Let's see what really happened. The day started off with flat, and here Georgia won that one 4-1. Raining was going on in the Western Ring, and Auburn actually swept that one 5-0. But at halftime, they went back and looked at some things, and they said a rider was off pattern, so they took a point away from Auburn. They gave it to Georgia, and that made everything knotted up at 5-5 at the half. Over we go to the second half. Now, these are good events for Auburn, so things looked good. However, fences was 2-2, so there's a tie, and then, Georgia kept things even. So, again, now we're looking at a 7-7 meet. Who's going to win this? Well, horsemanship went 4-1 for Auburn. That made the final score 11-8 in favor of the Tigers. So this was a good win for Auburn. It was a little closer than they would have liked, but they won it, and they got that margin of victory that they needed that is going to force Texas A&M and Georgia to meet each other in the first round of the SEC tournament. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. As far as Georgia goes, this was actually a good meet for them. They did better than expected, especially over fences, so they have nothing to be ashamed of. They made Auburn work for this win. All right, let's look at another meet. TCU at Baylor. I thought TCU was going to win this one by about 4 points. Let's see what happened. Fences went 3-2 for Baylor. Flat went 3-2 for TCU. Horsemanship went 3-2 for Baylor. And reining went 3-2 for Baylor. And that made the final score 11-9 Baylor. So this was a big win for Baylor. Huge win. This was not expected. Even though it was a home meet, we've seen Baylor come up short a lot recently at home, but not this Saturday. This time they rode well and they got the win. For TCU, now I always say road meets are not that big of a deal if you lose, though, but this one kind of is for them. Other teams this year, they have gone into Waco and they've gotten a win, like Oklahoma State and Texas A&M. So this loss is not a very good look for the Frogs. One more meet to look at, South Carolina at Fresno State. Now, I thought Fresno State was going to win this one. They're the home team. I thought they'd win by about 3 points. But first, before we get into that, let's talk about pasta primavera. Now, I didn't know exactly what that was. I've had it before, but I went and I looked up that it means spring pasta. Okay, and according to Wikipedia, which was founded by Auburn grad Jimmy Wales, back in 1975, New York restaurateur Cirio Massioni flew to the Canadian summer home of the Italian Baron Carlo Amato, and he began experimenting with various dishes based on the wild game in the area. But the Baron was like, no, this is too heavy. So Massioni, he mixed up butter and cream and cheese with some vegetables and some pasta, and everybody loved it. It was so good that he took it back with him to New York City, where he had some restaurants, and it just became the food craze of the 1970s. Now, what does all this have to do with South Carolina at Fresno State? Not a lot, except that there are these pair of sisters whose last name is Primavera, and one of them rides for South Carolina, Bella, and the other one rides for Fresno State, Paloma. Well, on Saturday, the good Lord saw fit to have the random draw match Bella against Paloma in fences. Now, I've only been following the sport for about the last 5 years, so I can't say for certain, but I believe this may be the first time we've had sisters ride in a head-to-head matchup in varsity college equestrian. So using my vast powers as the leading college equestrian expert, I have declared this the Pasta Primavera Bowl. So let's find out who won. In fences, that went 4-1 for South Carolina. Flat went 4-1 for South Carolina. Horsemanship went 4-1 for Fresno State, and reining went 3-2 for Fresno State. That made the final score 11-9 in favor of South Carolina. So congratulations to South Carolina for winning the Pasta Primavera Bowl. And even if there had not been sisters competing in this, it still would have been a really nice road win for the Gamecocks because it puts them in the driver's seat for either that 7th or 8th invitation to go to Ocala. Fresno State really wanted this win, and they almost had it. The Bulldogs would have probably won the tiebreaker if this had ended up a 10-10 in the overall score. So that Primavera point, as I have named it, it actually decided this meet, along with the other 19 points that were also going on. But I think Fresno State still is likely to get to Ocala, but they could really use another win on their resume just to make sure. But yeah, Pasta Primavera Bowl 2025. All right, that's all of this week's action, so now let's take a look at the official Auburn Elvis College Equestrian Rankings. We actually had some unexpected results this past week, so I had to make some changes in the rankings. Number 1 is Auburn. The Tigers are 10-1, and they are guaranteed now to end the regular season with the fewest losses in the country. Also, as I mentioned, Auburn clinched the top spot in the SEC tournament seeding, so they're going to face South Carolina in a few weeks in that. Number 2 is SMU. The Mustangs are 9-4, and they just keep on winning and winning big. The NCEA had them at number 4 last week, and they're probably going to keep moving up, and eventually they might match my rankings. Number 3 is Texas A&M. The Aggies are 7-5. They move up a spot because they won at Baylor in the fall, and unlike TCU, they did not this weekend. So the Aggies are going to finish either 2nd or 3rd in the SEC, and it ain't going to really matter because they're going to face Georgia either way. Number 4 is TCU. The Frogs are 7-4. That loss at Baylor was rough. Texas A&M and Oklahoma State were able to beat Baylor in Waco, but somehow the Frogs couldn't. And that tells me that they are the 4th team out of those top 4 teams right now. Number 5 is Georgia. The Bulldogs are 6-5. Just 3 weeks ago, the NCEA tried to have you believe that Georgia was the number 3 team in the nation. Well, they're not obviously that good, but they are still a strong team that can do some damage in the ring, so I moved them back up to number 5 this week. Number 6 is Oklahoma State.
Yeehaw!
The Cowgirls are 6-4, and now that the NCEA voters have abandoned their love affair with Georgia, they've fallen in love with Oklahoma State as that team that they want to artificially elevate up into the top 4. And of course, SMU showed that that's probably not the case. So the NCAA is still going to have the Cowgirls a little too high for my taste, especially with those meets they've got coming up, but oh well. Number 7 is South Carolina. The Gamecocks are 5-5. They won 2 nice road meets out in California, and they should be solidly within the field of teams getting to the national championship tournament. Number 8 is Fresno State. The Bulldogs are 7-4. They dropped a home meet to South Carolina, and they're going to finish their season with 2 tough road meets. But they look to be in that field that's going to go to Ocala right now. But they really need to win at least one more meet somewhere, maybe on the road or in the Big 12 tournament, just to make sure. Because if they don't get one more win, they better look out for number 9, Baylor. The Bears are 3-6. Their home win over TCU has them back in the conversation for that 8th spot going to Ocala. They have 2 winnable road meets this week, and after that, I think they need to win at least once in the Big 12 tournament. So we'll see. And the number 10 team is UT Martin. The Skyhawks are 6-5. Just about every result that could have hurt their chances to get to Ocala has come to pass in these last few weeks. As things stand, UT Martin pretty much has to beat South Carolina on the road and then win the ECAC tournament just to get considered for Ocala. That's pretty rough. Now let's take a look at the single discipline rankings. And unlike the dual discipline rankings, I didn't need to change anything here. Sweetbriar beat Lynchburg at home, but I expected that. It was a little closer than expected, and now those 2 teams have split their home and home series, so let's just hope that the NCAA voters will look at the entire resumes now. Number 1 is Sweetbriar. The Vixens are 4-2 with their losses being at Lynchburg and at South Carolina. Best resume hands down. If the NCAA doesn't make them number 1, y'all should just revolt because it means that the voters ain't doing their jobs. Number 2 is Lynchburg. The Hornets are 4-5 with their losses being at home to Charleston, at Swanee, and at South Carolina and at Georgia, and now at Sweetbriar. So we can discount the Georgia and the Sweetbriar losses, but they still have 3 other losses, one of which is at home. There's just no reason that they should be number 1 with that resume. Number 2, yes, but not number 1. Number 3 is Charleston. The Cougars are 4-3 with losses at Sweetbriar, at Dartmouth, and at Sacred Heart. But they beat Dartmouth at home and then beat Lynchburg in Lynchburg, so that's a pretty nice resume. Number 4 is Dartmouth. The Green are 4-3 with losses at Charleston, at Texas A&M, and at UC Davis. They beat Charleston and Swanee at home, and I can see why the voters like them more than Charleston, but Charleston has that dang road win at Lynchburg, and that's got to count for something. Number 5 is Swanee. The Tigers are 4-3. They beat Lynchburg at home, they lost to Sweetbriar at home, and they lost at Dartmouth. And they also beat Centenary and Berry a bunch too. The Tigers are just on the outside looking in right now, so they're hoping that they're going to do really well in the ODAC tournament and play their way into an Ocala invitation. Number 6 is Centenary.
It's a twister! It's a twister!
The Cyclones are 3-4. They've done about as well as they would have hoped, but I think there are just too many better teams ahead of them that are going to make it to Ocala. Number 7 is Sacred Heart. The Pioneers are 1-4, and they're sort of in the same boat as Centenary, but they have a home win over Charleston, which is really nice. I just don't think they're going to make it to Ocala this year. Number 8 is Bridgewater. The Eagles are 2-4. They have really improved this season. They beat Swanee on the road and Berry at home. They probably won't get to Ocala, but even still, this was their best NCEA season yet. And number 9 is Berry. The The Vikings are 0-3. They've ridden well enough to put a scare into some teams, but we'll see if they can get that first win coming up this week. Now let's take a look at some meet previews. Minnesota Crookston at South Dakota State. We've seen Minnesota Crookston improve this season, but they're still a step behind the Jackrabbits, at least when they go on the road. So I think this one ends up being at about 11-5 in favor of South Dakota State. Auburn at SMU. Okay, Auburn fans, I hope you have enjoyed the regular season up until now, because you might be about to get a reality check. SMU is good. In fact, the way they are riding right now, Auburn should be the underdog in this one. But just let me tell you what the stats say. Fences, Auburn's probably going to win that one by about 3 points. Flat, SMU will probably win that one by a point or two. Horsemanship, Auburn should win that one by about a point. And reining should be about a point or two for Auburn. So if you add all that up, that's about a 4 or 5 point win for Auburn. But I just don't think that's going to happen, all right? Now, this is the very rare occasion when I am going to go by equitation over feelings, and I'm going to say that SMU wins this one probably by about 4 points, even though the stats suggest the opposite. So we'll see what happens. Fresno State at TCU. Man, I just don't think Fresno State's going to be able to get a win on the road. I think TCU wins this one by about 3 points, maybe more. Berry at Lynchburg. This is going to be a tough meet for the Vikings. We saw them ride well near the end of the fall, but going on the road to Lynchburg is going to be a whole nother challenge. I think the Hornets win this one by 4, 5, maybe 6 points. UT Martin at South Carolina. Now, the stats suggest this one's going to be pretty close. It gives the edge to South Carolina in the jumping seat, and it gives the edge to UT Martin in the Western rides. Maybe about a 1 or 2 point win for South Carolina if it's close. Maybe more, but I've already used up my equitation over feelings on that SMU Auburn meet, so there you go. Fresno State at Oklahoma State. When I look at the stats, it's pretty close. You know, fences I think is going to go to Fresno State. Flat's going to go to Oklahoma State. Horsemanship, Oklahoma State. Reining, toss-up. Add all that up, and the stats suggest a 2, maybe 3 point win for Oklahoma State. I think it might actually be a little bit bigger than that, but there you go. Baylor at South Dakota State. Baylor should win this one, but being on the road is going to make things difficult. I think all the events are going to go to Baylor, so I think Baylor's going to win it about 10-5. Auburn at Texas A&M. All right, another tough road meet for Auburn. Well, I think the same thing's going to happen in this one, an Auburn loss. Now, when you look at the stats, it kind of favors Auburn a little bit. It thinks, Auburn's going to win by about 2 or 3 points in fences. Flat will go about 2 points to A&M. Horsemanship should go by about a point to Auburn, and then reining will be a toss-up. That suggests about a 2 point win for Auburn, but I just don't think that's going to happen, y'all. But, hey, if it does, that's great. But even if Auburn loses both of these meets this weekend, it's not that big of a deal for Auburn. Auburn's still going to be the number 1 or maybe the number 2 team in the nation when they head into tournament time. And then if they win the SEC tournament, they'll bounce right back up to number 1 almost certainly heading into Ocala. So it's okay, Tiger fans. It's just that these top 4 teams will all win at home against pretty much anybody. Still got a couple more meets to look at. Baylor versus Minnesota Crookston, neutral site meet, but still, I think the Bears should win this one convincingly. I think Baylor wins 12-4. Bridgewater versus Berry, neutral site meet here. The stats suggest Bridgewater's going to, win this one by about 2 to 3 points. And yeah, I think that's probably what we're going to see. Swanee at Lynchburg. Now this one could be closer than expected. I think flat goes 3-1, maybe 3-2 for Lynchburg, and then I think fences would be about a 3-2 Lynchburg win as well. So all that would add up to about 6-4 Lynchburg. Close, but still a good home win for the Hornets. Well, that's all of this week's meets that are coming up. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Go eat some pasta primavera. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Well, thank you very much for listening, and war horses.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.